We talk about what happened over the weekend and what we've got going on this week on Lincoln Square. So I'm Susan Demas, the executive editor, and I'm so happy to have Sam Osterhout. He is our executive producer extraordinaire. You also have seen him doing some great interviews lately, like with David Litt last week.
I loved that
Mhm.
conversation, by the way.
That
He
was
was
so much
so
fun.
funny and so smart and so good. If you haven't seen, you guys got to go watch it.
Yeah, definitely. That was a good one. And so, um, hope everybody had a great weekend. A little time to relax. But of course, the news does not stop. And so, we're going to just jump right into it. A couple not surprising, but surprising stories that
Yeah.
broke. Like the Washington Post had an exclusive on the Smithsonian caving to Trump and taking him out of their impeachment exhibit, even though he is, of course, the only president to have been impeached not once, but twice. And that comes on the heels of Trump wanting the head of the portrait gallery fired because of some of her comments on January 6th, and just his overall heavy handed approach to government where loyalty is king, not competency. And so I should say that after the story broke, the Smithsonian says that he will be added back in, but I think we'll have to wait and see on that, right, Sam?
Well, it's like, I mean, look, it's like the tariffs. Like, I struck a deal,
Hmm.
but what he's really saying is it's more terrible deal than we had in the first place. Like, we shouldn't have fucked around with this to begin with.
Right,
And it's the same thing. Why take him out of an exhibit in which he is very objectively where he belongs? And then just to say, "Oh, we're gonna put him back." What were they doing? Cleaning the paintings?
right. And I mean, this is just any time that someone who is a dictator or a wannabe dictator in history, we see this
Mhm.
controlling the narrative, controlling history is a big part of this because there's a lot of myth making involved. And so this just kind of follows, what we've seen throughout history where you're trying to, I mean, from day one, it was pardoning the J6, convicted felons,
Yep.
who tried to overthrow the government. This is trying to control how we see Trump, how we see our own history. And, it's more than just one exhibit.
It is, and, um, Nina Knight in the chat says, "Please talk about Texas." Nina, we're getting to it. I promise.
Yeah.
I promise you, yeah. No, but, over like, I was, trying to write Winners and Losers on Friday, which I think comes out today, and it's always, like, a
It's
tricky.
it's out now.
Oh,
You can
good.
read it after the show.
I will go back and probably not reread it, but I will read the comments. So
I was urging everyone else. I
I
think you
love comments. Yeah, yeah. But, uh, but as I was, you know, writing this and I'd already made a decision on who to pick and we'd had the thumbnails built and all this stuff, all of the news kept coming in. And I know we're going to talk about a couple of other things, in a sec, the, Corporation for Public Broadcasting, namely. Um, but also Friday, he fired the woman who's in charge of statistics for, for jobs. And
you
it's
should
the
read
same thing.
Don Moynihan's piece on that we ran, over the weekend. It's a great breakdown of, again, trying to control our reality.
Ugh. And that's it. And that's it. And the Smithsonian and that and the J6 and all of it is part and parcel. And the thing that really grabs me about this, uh, it is an autocratic move. Like that's plain and simple. But for anyone on, the right bros, the manosphere boys who talk about, well, autocracy is not that bad. Well, actually, it is. It's quite bad. And it's
Mhm.
not just bad because it puts people in danger, but it's bad because it's bad governance. You
Right.
you you cannot run a government this way. And I mentioned this in the piece that this is how you get Chernobyl when a meltdown, like literally a meltdown, happens and you don't feel comfortable reporting that up the chain because you're unable to deliver bad news, then you put millions of people at risk. And that's what's happening in every department, in every branch, and in every state and state house where there are Republicans in charge. That's what's happening right now.
Right.
It's literally a Chernobyl every day.
Right, and we saw that with the Texas flooding, where FEMA wasn't answering their phones, and God knows how many people were suffering or even dying because of that.
Hmm.
I mean, this has, like, real impacts on human life, but not knowing how our economy is doing, not in the future, maybe the August jobs report is gonna show 0.1% unemployment and 2 trillion jobs, that were added. Not knowing what is really going on, I
Yeah.
mean, that has huge effects, and that will affect, the strength of the dollar, which has been falling as
Hmm.
we're all paying more in tariffs. We're soon going to be paying more in taxes, and the dollar is getting weaker. I mean, we're just getting hit 3 different ways with how bad the economy is, not to mention the fact that inflation is going back up again. So, you can cook the books all you want. I mean, Argentina has tried this. We've all seen what
Yeah.
happened with the Soviet Union and the 5-year plans. But, on the ground at some point, even Trump's own voters, when you suddenly don't have a job and nobody else does in your town, those job numbers are going to be a joke to you, no matter how much you support Trump.
1,000%. I mean, you. It's funny because I think it's not funny. Nothing about this is funny, but over the last decade, Trump has asked his base to ignore their own lion eyes, and I think for the most part, the economy has been. I was going to say it's been stable, but there was a period between, say, March of 2020 and beyond when it wasn't quite stable. Um, but we're the richest nation that's ever been, right? We are comfortable and lazy, and we have our social media to deliver dopamine, all of these things. And when and so we're quite spoiled, I think. And when the rubber hits the road, and the real results of these policies, which I don't think Trump. I'd like to get your take on this too. I don't think Trump knows that these policies are bad.
No, he seems to be, like, fixated on tariffs. He has been, since he came to prominence in the '80s. And I think it's because he views them as a tool of revenge, and so he can reward people who, make him happy and, take revenge against countries that piss him off, like
Yeah.
Brazil, because his friend, is no longer in office and actually face some consequences, which, that would be a novel concept here in America.
Yeah.
And with his economic policies, I mean, clearly he's always favored helping the rich while telling the working class that he's their guy. And he's been better at selling it than most Republicans have. But now, you don't even have like the fig leaf, like the George W. Bush tax cuts, where everybody got like, 400, $500 in the mail. So you felt like you were getting something.
Yeah.
Now it's just completely skewed towards the top.
Yeah, I think, I always thought if Trump sort of figures out a way to send us all checks again, I think we should call it Trump change. It's just Trump change.
Yeah.
That's my dad pun coming coming through. I'm curious about this though. Um, Having been in the media for so long and worked as journalist and run media outlets, how do you responsibly cover this disconnect between uh, I- let me just say, how do you cover this chaos? How do you
Yeah.
cover the lies? I mean, I've seen Washington Post and New York Times, Guardian's doing great work as usual, um, covering it in it feels a little different than it has in the past year or two. But how do you cover this stuff?
So, I was running news outlets during Trump won and,
Mm.
daily news outlets,
Yeah,
and it was always just a fire hose. So it's a challenge. And there are a lot fewer journalists who are working, especially at like the local state level, beyond Washington and New York than ever before. And so it's really hard to keep up with, and I have a lot of sympathy for that. Trying to cover a Trump speech, I mean, everything from, like, sharks to windmills to, Hannibal Lecter. I mean, this is just an amount of crazy that nobody, trains for in journalism school. And so I think to some degree that accounts for the fact that people are just looking for something to grab onto that makes sense that they write about, but then you
Yeah.
leave like 90% of the crazy off the table and people don't know. So that's a problem. This time I do think it's different. And, thankfully, I love working for Lincoln Square where, we don't have corporate masters telling me, hey, you don't need to write about Trump today, even though, come on. Even if
Right.
you're covering local government, everything affects you. The reason why you're not going to have enough money for your police force because, suddenly there are huge budget cuts coming at the state and local levels. Um, but you are seeing a very heavy-handed approach from entities like ABC and CBS, the Washington Post,
Yep.
whose owner Jeff Bezos, is in bed with Trump, and it's gone beyond just a tacit change. You have explicit orders. We cannot be we need to do pro-Trump coverage. CBS has a bias monitor, and that's really affecting the quality of information that people are getting. And I think that's why you're seeing an explosion of independent media for people who are just like, I don't want the bullshit. I want to know what's going on.
Yeah. And I think about that a lot, in, Lincoln Square and as I watch our, really incredible audience, like, this is so energizing to be able to produce this content and create this community and interact and see what all of you out there are saying, like, somebody said, "Don't forget the whales," and when you said about
Yes.
sharks, the whales are dying in great numbers because of, I don't know, something, windmills. Um, and, but I also understand, having worked in TV and on, the sort of discovery side, the all of that, I understand that those corporations, like, man, it kind of sometimes would be nice to have a corporate overlord because you could, pay everyone and everyone well, and you could do, you could expand, but it's a deal with the devil, obviously. But I do understand that impulse to, you've got a staff and they have families and you want to take care of them, and somebody says you have to do this or you're not gonna get paid, and your people aren't gonna get paid, and that's a tricky thing,
Right.
and I think it's also why it's so important to have outlets like Lincoln Square, like Midas, like The Bulwark, The Contrarian, all of these, we're ultimately independent,
Mhm.
um, and Substack is making that really possible. I
And
wanna make
we probably should, segue into talking about the Corporation for Public
That's what I
Broadcasting.
was gonna say.
And I probably like a lot of people my age, I'm a Gen Xer. I mean, I grew up with Mr. Rogers and Sesame Street. That was my
Yeah.
childhood.
Yep.
That was a treat, for like the hour I was allowed to watch television. And, um, it was, just kind of amazing because, at that time, like everybody knew, Grover and
Yeah.
Mr. Snuffleupagus and Big Bird. And that was just, so defining. And it really, was beyond just a fun show to watch. You learned your ABCs, you learned your
Yeah.
numbers. I learned how to count to 10 in Spanish. And, I probably, have stunted, on my Spanish since then, but, it was nice to know. And, beyond that, just, Nova and all the great programming that they have, it really has made educational programming and fun and accessible for everyone. Moving Sesame Street to HBO kind of defeats the purpose because, a lot of people can't afford HBO, especially the people
Right.
who could really use that. And so, it's a real tragedy that we're at this point, and, I remember dating back at least to the '90s, maybe before, this was always kind of something out there, like defund PBS, Bert and Ernie are gay. I remember in
Oh
high
my
school.
god.
That was a big thing. And, it was kind of one of those talking points on the right, like to rail up the base. But I don't think anyone really thought that was going to happen. And that's
No.
kind of been the story of this Trump administration. He's making good on all of those awful promises that no one thought would come to pass.
I mean, there's a couple of things, in this. First of all, it was Friday, it came through the line, and I felt a great, great loss. My career started in public radio, and, I was, kind of working at Minnesota Public Radio, which is it's not exactly it is a local outlet, but it's like a massive local
Right.
system.
So
Um,
they'll be okay, like the
they'll
massive
be
ones are.
fine.
But it's in the small communities where that might be like your only news outlet. Those are the ones that are going to shut down.
Well, that's the thing, and, NPR has American Public Media and tangentially, and they distribute their great content that they're able to produce because of their capital, to the smaller stations, and in those models, the smaller stations will not pay for the content. They will, just license it and agree to broadcast. So, anyway, it's a whole deal, but the bigger point here is that with a company like PBS, and you mentioned putting, Sesame Street on HBO, and again, having come from a TV background, budgets per episode on network or HBO are in the millions, right? Per hour of content is wildly expensive. And PBS has managed to make some of the, most memorable and iconic content for pennies. I mean, we talk about USAID being an incredible investment for America. PBS and NPR and all of our public broadcasting services are doing incredible work for nothing. I mean, really nothing. And that is a massively good investment for our democracy, for our community, for our culture, for all of those things. And this is a theme, and it's kind of destroying me a little bit. Like I need to take a break. Um, that everything good about us, he's washing out. And
Yeah.
and Smithsonian is a part and parcel of that.
Yeah. And it's a great connection I feel like our generation has with our kids because it's like, "Oh, this is what I watched as a kid and now I'm sitting here watching it with you." I remember when my my
Yeah.
my first daughter was born and she did not sleep through the night like ever. And so I was watching old like it was called Sesame Street Unpaved, so it was literally the stuff from like the 70s for my childhood.
Wow.
And I'm here I was there with, like, my little infant and watching it, and, it was a really nice moment even though she had colic, so,
Yeah.
um, and that's the kind of thing that, is being destroyed here, these generations who have relied on this great programming, and
Yeah.
I feel like, this is part again of a greater project for Trump. Not only are you killing a public good, which he's shown he wants to do time and time again with Doge and all of these cuts, but what will spring up in its place in all of these smaller towns and rural outlets? You're going to see, an expansion of right wing media. I was
Totally.
driving through rural Pennsylvania a couple months ago, and I was struck by all the billboards for Tim Pool, and he's on like the Russia affiliated, radio.
Oh my
And you're
god.
just going to see more of that.
Yeah. Well, I think here's the thing that, everyone watching right now, don't get fooled. A couple of years ago, who was it? A donor, big sort of right-wing conservative guy funded all of these sort of like what they called local, newspapers. They weren't local. And Tim Pool is not an indie journalist, right? This is a corporatization of a sort of style, right? A style of journalism or a style of content that looks raw and it looks fresh and breaking news and like I'm just a guy coming on risking it all to no, they're paid enough that they can put up billboards in your community. That is bananas. That is so crazy. And that's the vacuum that Trump wants to create in local communities by putting his thumb on the scale for PBS and public broadcasting. You create a
Yeah.
vacuum, and it allows incredible amounts of private money to flood in, and that's all propaganda.
Yeah. And, I think it's important to note that NPR in particular has really tried to bend over backwards to its conservative critics. They have on a lot of folks who have a conservative perspective. They really lean into, what I might call both sides journalism, but, they consider to be, objective, where it's this is what the right says, this is what the left says, because, they've known that there's been a huge criticism of them because they do get government funding. But in the end, it really doesn't matter how much you try and bend to these critics. If they have the power, they've shown that they will try and break these institutions,
Yeah.
and it's a very sad lesson for all of us. I do think that we should get to some more positive news that one of our viewers was bringing up, and that is the Democrats actually standing up and fighting back against this huge power play in Texas to
Yep.
redistrict. And really, I mean, we shouldn't even use that fig leaf term. It's a straight up gerrymander. I mean, the map in Texas was drawn by Republicans. It was gerrymandered to begin with. This is saying we didn't go far enough because
Yeah.
Trump wants us to squeeze 5 more seats because he thinks he's in trouble for 2026, and let's go ahead and do it. Generally, when you go through a midterm redistricting process, because this is done every 10 years across the states, because populations shift. And so technically, if you're going to do this kind of correction, it's because you've seen such a massive shift. Now, it doesn't always go that way, and that can be true of red states and blue states. But Texas is a pretty egregious example of this. But like the last time they pulled this, Democrats have left the state to deny a quorum. Greg Abbott has basically put a bounty on all of their heads. He's the governor of Texas. But this seems to be a more organized attempt than the last time.
Well, I think yeah, it's so disheartening. It really is. And I think that what the Democrats are doing is I always think about this, like, there's bad news, and you have 2 options when you hear the bad news, and, the our viewers are really good at thinking this through in this particular way. In fact, it's probably why I think of things in these terms because of you guys, but you have 2 options. One is, be like, "Oh, fuck it. This I guess the deck's stacked, and, we can't this is it." Or you think, as long as I'm standing and breathing, there's more work that we have to do. And in that, I think this is a rallying cry. And it may feel helpless. The Dems, Nina in the chat was saying, where was that one? Dems are going to be expelled from the Texas legislature. I mean, they're really trying to go nuclear, or nuclear, as G.W. Bush would say. And it feels like, well, what, you know, you have a bad idea, and instead of listening to the people who vote you in, you say, "No, no, 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 no. And we're going to just do the bad idea and make sure that you don't get a choice in this." And I always think of through lines for these lives, and you have Smithsonian, you have Corporation for Public Broadcasting, you have gerrymandering. These are all attempts to control everything. Really, every story that we've talked about today is a subversion of democracy, on the ground, and it's happening right now. So what
Yeah.
do we do? What do we do?
Well, I think one of the things that we hear from our viewers all the time is this frustration with Democrats for not fighting back, especially in Congress, and that's kind of embodied by Chuck Schumer and his strongly worded letters.
Yeah.
Very few people, really are eager to put Trump in his place. I mean, even tweets that I read from Bernie Sanders, it starts with Mr. President, and instead of like, hey, fuckface, stop doing this. And I look,
Hey,
I'm not
asshole.
right. I'm not a US senator because I just use the word fuckface, but, it just that kind of fight that people are looking for, and not affording people who are trying to destroy us, a level of respect that they've shown to no one else, besides the Doge kids that are, destroying our government piece by
Yeah.
piece. And so, and what they're doing in Texas, is this going to work? The odds are definitely against them. That is the truth, but I do find it very interesting that they are in Illinois, and, JB Pritzker is the governor. He happens to be a billionaire,
Right.
and he's willing to pay their $500 fines, per day for not showing up, and having that kind of backing could make a difference. Is this also helping him possibly run for president? Probably, because, politicians don't do things out of the good of their own heart. Nobody does. That's why you get into politics, because you have some sort of an ego. But using it for good the way FDR used his fortune for
Yes.
good. I mean, that is something that is extremely helpful. And, the fact that you have Gavin Newsom in California, again, a lot of people, not his biggest fan, a guy who definitely loves the camera, but he's talking about gerrymandering a 52-0 map in California in Democrats' favor, running roughshod over their independent redistricting commission that is in a lot of states where Democrats could use to have some more seats because the idea was let's have a fair system, let's all play by the rules. But, when you have one party blowing up the rules, you know, playing by them all of a sudden is a great way to get wiped out politically. So,
Yeah.
um, I think that the example of, some of these Democrats that are willing to just say, "Hey, let's fight fire with fire." I've seen a lot of folks, who are not huge fans of Gavin Newsom, say, "Hey, respect.
Yeah.
At least somebody is fighting back."
Yeah, and that's, it's a tough one. That's a really tricky thing, and I've been thinking about this a lot, and I'm on the fence a little bit about about it because it feels like if the problem is gerrymandering, the solution probably isn't more gerrymandering.
Right.
However, we just get rocked. We are
Yeah.
just getting rocked, and we're not playing the game. I mean, we're not in this game. I think fundamentally, I think in 5, 10, 20 years, this game has to end.
Right.
There has to be a rethinking of everything that's been happening. Uh, I had Osita Nwanibu on last week, and he's got a book coming out that is like, we need to just fundamentally remake our democracy. We just
Yeah.
need to rebuild it from the ground up.
Which makes
Um,
sense. I mean, our democracy
Totally.
is 250 years old,
Yep.
A lot of people have gotten very good at rigging the game even before Trump.
Yeah, 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 yeah. Um, that feels very daunting, but I think also, again, looking for signs of hope. Um, if there's a project to be done, Americans have a tendency to join in and do that, accomplish that project collectively, like we really, really do. And I think that's a big impetus behind MAGA. Is there was an emptiness in some lives, and they found a meaning and purpose and collaborated to do something really, really bad. uh, but there's no reason we can't do the same to do something really, really incredible in this
Yeah.
country. Um, that and maybe that's a good time to talk about what we got going on this week. Um,
Yeah.
we have, speaking of big collaborative projects that we're all undertaking together. We have a lot of good content this week. And Susan, we've been doing just a ton of these lives uh, over the past few months, and it's been a whirlwind. It really has been. We have today. Oh, I'll be talking to this guy, Michael Barash, later today at 11. Actually, he is a 9/11 lawyer. We've had him on before a few months ago. But as we get closer to the anniversary of 9/11, you're not going to believe this, but Trump is hollowing out all of the help and all of the assistance and all of the aid for the first responders and the heroes who worked and really risked their lives on 9/11. So we're going to talk a little bit about the shape of that catastrophe. It'll be really interesting, and also just coincidentally, Michael Barash is hilarious. Like, he's one of these guys who, I don't know, he's just really funny, and it's refreshing because he does such heavy, heavy, heavy work, and he manages to keep his head about him. So I hope you guys all tune in for that. Um, what do we have tomorrow?
Tomorrow, I will be talking with Edwin Eisendrath. He's a Chicago radio host. You know him. He comes on every week with me, and I think you'll be seeing him more on Lincoln Square. You've read his articles. We publish them all the time, but we're looking forward to having him do more lives with us as well. He always has just, I think, such a great perspective as somebody who's been in an elective office. He has worked behind the scenes on a lot of things, and also has a media background too. Really smart take on everything. And of course, on Tuesdays, we have our new hour-long Anchor Watch with Bobby Jones. He will be joined by Charlie Ballard, a Michigan State University economist, and will be continuing his series on the Constitution, which, if for those of you who are already missing the Corporation for Public Broadcasting, I feel like this is really in its vein with going back to, what the building blocks of this country. And so,
Yeah,
we all have a better understanding of our country and where we are today.
I was gonna say Bobby. I love Bobby so deeply. Bobby Jones is like a, I don't know. He just, the ability to turn on the camera and talk for a half an hour and keep you gripped, just keep you right there, is really remarkable. But side story, he's like that when we get on calls.
Right,
Like,
right.
when we have calls with Bobby, it's the same thing. And it's like, Bobby, I want to keep talking, but we got another meeting to be to be at. I love that guy. If you're not watching Anchor Watch, you really should be. I wanted to say, Monique Ponsa, and just to pause on the content for the week, she says, yes, we need to rebuild our democracy, but how can this be accomplished without directly addressing the complicity of GOP, who have spent decades and millions on disproportionately advocating for its demise? And I couldn't have said it better myself. That's exactly right. Um, Rebuilding our democracy feels like a total pipe dream, without holding people to account.
Yeah, and I
Anyway,
I feel like that was one of our fundamental problems after the 2020 insurrection.
yep,
Justice moved way too slowly,
yes,
and we are paying the price now.
yeah, that's right. It's daunting. It's not impossible. As soon as we think it's impossible, then we turn into, you know, Russia, basically.
Right.
Monique, thanks for that. Thanks for that post. Tomorrow night we also have strategy session. That's
Yes.
our paid subscribers only show. Every once in a while we'll open up that paywall. But it's really an incredible show. Stuart and Rick and Joe, and they, some, a couple of them are traveling this week, and so but that'll be another good one. Um, Wednesday we have punching up,
Yeah.
and Maya will be joined by God.
This is a must watch.
Yeah, yeah. God, we had God with Rick, I don't know, 2 months ago ish, and
Mhm.
it's hilarious. But Maya, having been a stand-up comic for years and built her whole career on that, really understands the sort of how comedy and humor, um, are are sort of essential salves for what we're facing at this moment. And God is a satirist, clearly. So I'm really interested in that conversation. We're gonna ask him some very personal questions because I don't
And
think you don't know God. You need to have a relationship with God.
we do, a personal relationship with God.
Yes.
And after the week we've had, I think we all need the little God in our lives.
We do, yes. Yes, especially this particular god. He's incredible. Um, and then, what do we have Thursday? I we
I'm
might
really excited
oh,
that
yeah.
you are going to be talking with an official who was just fired by the Department of Education and a labor leader, because I feel like hearing from people directly impacted is so important. And that's something that we're going to try and do more on Lincoln Square. Hearing it right from the folks most impacted and what's going on the inside with all of these cuts, because it's one thing to read about them and they're horrific, but people have devoted their lives to public service and are trying to do things, the most basic things, educating our kids, and are being stopped as part of this political agenda from Trump. I think that's going to be a great show. I'm really looking forward to it.
Yeah, it's just one of those, they reached out to us to, ask if we had any interest, and I was like, "Oh, yeah, of course. Of course we have interest in this. These are real stories," and I think, with Edwin, for example, a big part of our move is getting the stories that are on the ground, going to the people who are seeing and experiencing what's happening, whether they're in local newsrooms, which Susan, your interviews with those local journalists that's some of my favorite stuff that we do. It's just really good because I think we've all known, journalists who come out of college, they go to a local newsroom, they are so tough and so hungry and so active and, it's some of the best, journalism I think that we do. So
Yeah, and it's great to hear there, from the folks who are there on the ground and talking with people.
yeah,
Like, when we had, Zach Smith from Iowa Starting Line last week, and he was talking about that incredible series on Iowa's cancer crisis. I mean, I feel like those stories with just the fire hose of news out of Trump, they're getting lost all the more,
yeah,
but it's so important, and so I really enjoy those conversations, and, I'm glad to hear from all of you that you're enjoying them too because, we do have a big country, we are all impacted by what happens, out of Washington, but there is a lot more going on, and so, it's great that we are able to, uh, hear those stories as well. And then on Fridays, we always have Rick and Andrew Wilson breaking down the numbers. I think that's become a huge fan favorite because, we see these numbers all the time, but they take the time to tell us, what matters and why, and to kind of get a sense of, hey, are people starting to get fed up with Trump? Why? Who is? And
yeah.
what is it that is really breaking through. I'm really glad that we have this show because
I am too.
they do it with and they're funny too. It's not
They're
just a
hilarious.
couple accountants, sharing numbers.
It's so and, like, who knew Andrew Wilson was such a good dude? Like, that guy is great. I love him so deeply, and he's so kind and Rick did a good job with that one. He
Yeah,
really he really did, and he's
I think
so
we got to
smart.
show some more family photos though. I think that would be a fun.
Yes, that would be amazing. Oh my god, Rick with hair? That would be really remarkable. I wonder if he ever had hair, probably.
Didn't we see a photo where he
I
had
feel
red
like
hair?
oh, right, I feel like we did. Anyway, it's very cute,
We'll
and
see if we get in trouble for this.
I know, yeah, for sure. We were joking, we were backstage, last Friday, and I was like, "Andrew, you're like our very own Steve Kornacki," and Rick was like, "We've gotta get him aboard." It's like,
Yes.
"Yes, get him aboard, he can,
Maybe a
like, point out the stuff."
hologram like John King on CNN.
Yeah, exactly. That would be amazing. We're gonna need more paid subs for that. Uh,
Yes. Yeah.
yeah, so if you're not already and you wanna see Andrew Wilson with a board, make sure you, like, up your subscription game to Lincoln Square.
Yeah. I think, the last thing I'd love to leave people with is if you did not watch Stuart Stevens on Friday afternoon, just go off the cuff for a half hour starting with Trump's obvious move in the prelude to pardoning Ghislaine Maxwell, but really going through his role as being a top strategist for the Republican Party for years, taking responsibility for where the party is headed and what this country should be, what we all need to do. It was really inspiring, and so if you didn't have a chance to view it, it's still up on Lincoln Square. I would urge you to start off your Monday with it because it will give you some hope.
It'll give you goosebumps. I mean, I was trying to finish out my Friday at the coffee shop. We've gone behind the scenes a lot today. I kinda love it. I don't know if the maybe the audience is bored, um, but he called I'd put out a call because there was so much breaking news, and I was like, "Hey, Rick, Stuart, Joe, who can any of you go live to talk about what's happening?" And Stuart reached out and was like, "Let's do it."
Yeah, and he
But
also Rick had a great direct to camera video
and
for us too.
amazing.
Um, but Stuart just said, "Sure." I think he
Yeah.
was like done with his bike ride and had
Yep.
time.
Yeah, and was feeling really fired up, and so I rushed home, built the studio, scheduled the live, did all the stuff, and I was like, "Stuart, if whatever you need to say, say it. You can go 5 minutes, you can go 10 minutes." And he went like 26 minutes, and I could have watched it for another hour. It was just so good. He's like, he was born with some sort of storytelling, like,
Yeah.
in his brain. He's just so wonderful. But yeah, you gotta watch it. You gotta watch that.
Yeah. He's just so thoughtful and, we're so lucky to have him and Joe and Rick on Lincoln Square. They share, just their incredible knowledge. Joe has won so many Democratic races. The Stuart and Rick have always said like he was the guy we didn't want to go up against back when they were
Yeah,
Republican strategists. Rick is just hilarious and he's particularly fired up about this,
he
Epstein
is.
story. He was talking with a couple of the survivors. You should go on to his Substack, Against All Enemies. Some really powerful interviews there. Just beyond the disgusting acts, of Trump, but really, what this is all about, which is a huge miscarriage of justice.
It is. Yeah, I've seen Rick fired up in the past, but never quite fired up like this. It's funny because he's like, um, just an expert at poking Trump and he's like the mastermind behind so much of that. But at his core, he's so deeply human and so deeply caring. And I think it also goes to show that, his son Andrew is such also incredibly kind and amazing person. So when he sees suffering like this, you know, he'll tear up. It's really remarkable to watch. Um, Man, we're lucky to have these guys.
And we're
Uh,
lucky to have all of you. Really,
yeah.
you make Lincoln Square what it is. It's fun to do, shows like this because, we can interact with you a little bit more and, see what's on your mind. And of course, you can always feel free to drop things in the chat. We read all of them. Um, Always, if you have questions for any of the guys, we try and, get those to them
Yep.
because they want to hear from you too. So I just thank you for joining us every Monday morning. And Sam, it was so much fun to do this
This
with
was a
you.
blast. Yeah, we
This
should
is a
do this
much
more.
better we should do this more. I mean, I think we can say this is more fun than our staff meetings.
Yeah. A little bit. Yeah, a little bit. A
Yeah.
little bit. Yeah, look for us in the chat, chat on Substack. We're gonna be doing that more coming up.
Yeah. Yeah, that should be great. Well, great, everybody. I hope you have a wonderful week, and thank you so much for being here.
Thanks, everybody.